All right, good evening and welcome everyone to Mount Washington Observatory's Science in the Mountains lecture series. My name is Brian Fitzgerald and I'm the Director of Education here at Mount Washington Observatory. Thanks so much for joining us. This evening to tell us all about the science of solar power is Revision Energy Solar Design Specialist and Employee Owner Chris Kelly, who will join us in just a little bit here. For those of you who aren't already familiar with the Mount Washington Observatory, we are a private, nonprofit, and member-supported organization with a mission to advance our understanding of the forces that create Earth's weather and climate. The way that we accomplish that is through operating our Summit weather station and remote sensing equipment around the clock with weather observation and forecasting services, by conducting research and product testing projects, and by offering innovative educational programs. If you have questions for tonight's speaker and you're joining us through Zoom, please make use of that Q&A button that you can find at the bottom of your toolbar. Make sure you get your questions in as they come up, and we'll leave time at the end to make sure we can get to as many as possible. If you're joining on the Facebook live stream, welcome. Thanks for joining us that way. We won't be able to respond to your questions in real time during the program, but we'll make sure to follow up after the program and respond as quickly as we can. If you'd like to join us for a future Science in the Mountains program on Zoom, we'd encourage you to sign up over at mountwashington.org. Alrighty, well, before we kick things off and hand it over to our speaker for this evening, just a short poll this evening, because we're always curious who's joining us and who's in the audience. So right now, I'll go ahead and launch a poll question. If you're on Zoom with us tonight, you'll see just two questions here. One, we're curious, where are you joining from? Perhaps it's a state within New England. Perhaps you're joining from outside New England, or perhaps you're joining from outside the good old US of A. And then always curious as well, hear from a lot of different folks, and I'm always amazed how many times people are joining for the first time and compared with people who've joined us for quite a while now. We're curious if you've joined us for a Science in the Mountains program previously. So either, yes, I attend regularly, yes, but maybe just 1, 2, or 3 times, or no, this is my first program. So I'll give you all just a couple more actually just about 10 more seconds here to get your responses in. Looks like most of you have responded already. So we'll close the poll in about 3, 2, 1. All righty, and we'll go ahead and share those results with everyone on Zoom. It looks like New Hampshire is well represented there, with almost half of you joining from the Granite State and some good representation across New England. No one from outside the country today. What a shame. But good representation all around, including outside of New England. And then for those of you, have you joined a Science in the Mountains program before? Wow, almost 70% of you attend regularly. Well, welcome. We're so glad that you can join us month to month for these great programs, and happy to have you back. For those of you who are just joining for maybe checking in here or there, welcome to you. And hey, for 8 of you, it's your first Science in the Mountains program. Welcome. We encourage you to check in whenever you see a program that catches your interest. Alrighty, well, we'll go ahead. We'll stop sharing those results there. And without further ado, I don't want to take any more time away for our speaker this evening. We're really gracious that he's here to speak with us tonight. His name is Chris Kelly. He's a solar design specialist and employee owner at Revision Energy. So Chris, feel free, take it away. Welcome to the program. If you can see and hear me all right. Hey, I can see you. That's good. That's a good start.
Can you hear me?
And I can hear you. Awesome. Well, hey,
Okay.
take it away. It's all you.
All right. Thanks, Brian. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining tonight. A little bit about me. I'm a solar design specialist at Revision Energy, like Brian said. So I work on our residential team at Revision Energy. So I work with homeowners, go out to site, do evaluations of their homes for viability for solar projects. We also do heat pumps, battery storage, heat pump, hot water tanks, EV charging, and stuff like that. So work with regular folks to try and lower their energy bills and reduce their carbon footprint. A little bit about our company: we're 100% employee owned, certified B Corp. We just turned 20 this year, and we have locations in Maine, New Hampshire, where I live now, and Massachusetts. I saw there were a healthy number of you from Connecticut. Shout out to you guys. Go Huskies. That's my home state. So I'm going to jump in here. Share screen. Let's see. I'm hoping you guys can see that.
Yeah, looks great, Chris.
Sweet. So gonna keep this relatively high level. Full disclosure, I'm not an electrical engineer or anything. Actually was a high school special ed teacher for about 4 years back in Connecticut before making a change in career. And I've been with Revision about 4 years now. So I've learned a ton, and the company is incredible for all kinds of reasons, but the training we receive is really top of the line. So I'm going to share a little bit about the actual science of photovoltaics, how we actually turn turn photons into electrons that we can use here on Earth, and then a little bit about the science that goes into kind of evaluations for solar projects, which is a little more of what I do. So we'll just jump into it here. Well, let's see. So photovoltaics, I want to say it's Greek for photo meaning sunlight, like photosynthesis, and voltaics referring to electricity. So solar photovoltaic panels basically take photons that are being sent from the center of our solar system 93 million miles away and use them to knock loose electrons in solar panels that we put on our homes and businesses. So we use those electrons to power the systems of our home, power the systems of our businesses, schools, and increasingly even cars, bikes, and all kinds of other devices. Here's a kind of a larger version of that cross section here. So here you can see kind of a generic solar cell. We've got a glass top sheet with an anti-reflective coating, some conductors, and then a negative conductor and a positive conductor. And then the magic really happens in the semiconductor, the silicon crystal there. So there's different kinds: monocrystalline, polycrystalline, and there's one of the crazy things about our industry is, and one of the reasons that costs for solar have dropped so rapidly over the past couple of decades is because the R&D has really been incredible. And you'll see a little bit later in the presentation, I'll share a couple of photos of my system at my home about three years ago, and we have 360 watt panels on our roof. And today, if I were to come to your home and quote you a proposal, most likely I'd quote you a 405 watt panel, but there are residential panels 420, 425 watts. So the underlying technology of how we actually get those photons to knock loose the electrons in the outer ring of these atoms, that remains unchanged largely, but improvements in manufacturing and efficiency and things like that have led to not only cost declines, but also improvements in just the performance of solar panels themselves. So how does it happen? So photons strike and ionize semiconductor materials in the solar panel, causing the outer electrons to break free of their atomic bonds. And due to the semiconductor structure, the electrons are forced in one direction, creating a flow of electrical current. Solar cells are not 100% efficient in crystalline silicon solar cells, in part because only certain light within the spectrum can be absorbed. Some of the light spectrum is reflected, some is too weak to create electricity, that's the infrared spectrum, and some in the ultraviolet spectrum creates heat energy instead of electricity. Fun fact about us as a company, Revision Energy started about 20 years ago up in very rural Maine doing solar thermal projects. So we were basically using the sun's energy to heat up I think they were using glycol. This is before my time, but some type of refrigerant, running that through a loop and then a heat exchanger to actually provide heat to people's homes or to their hot water. We have since transitioned exclusively to solar electric photovoltaics, largely because, that's just where the world is headed. We can pair solar with hyper efficient electric heating and cooling like heat pumps and get the desired effect, but we do still service our solar thermal installation. So a little bit of solar history, and I promise I'm not going to read all these slides to you. The photovoltaic effect was first observed as early as 1839. And then really in 1954 is where kind of modern PV got its start. You can read there the first solar device that produced a usable amount of electricity in 1958. And solar was being used in a number of small scale scientific and commercial applications. In the oil crisis of the 1970s, people were looking to diversify, the forms of energy that we're using, not only to get around, but to produce electricity. And this is where interest really started ramping up, and you started seeing a lot of investment in R&D, certainly through NASA and the space program. We can't run an extension cord out to space. So the space program did a lot of R&D on solar and really made some huge leaps there. And industry developments and research in the following years made PV more feasible, and a cycle of increasing production and decreasing cost began, which continues today. So solar panels make DC, direct current electricity. Our homes, most of us, unless you're truly off grid, meaning you don't have a connection to the electric grid like your neighbors, your home is almost certainly running on AC, alternating current. So as I said, solar panels make DC, our homes run on AC, so we use inverters to make this conversion. There's two kind of different design routes. We can go down micro inverters, where the power goes from DC to AC at the module level, at each individual solar module, and then AC wires run back to the point of interconnection. Or we have a centralized inverter where we're running DC back to a centralized inverter and making that conversion there. Without getting too far down the rabbit hole, that design, we have what's called DC optimizers, which kind of improve the performance of those types of systems. Here you can see my basement. So I don't know if you folks, Brian, can you see my cursor?
I can. It's a little bit faint, but a little bit yellow there. Yeah,
okay, perfect. So you can see two inverters here, one for each of the arrays on my home. We could have gone with one inverter. I actually didn't design this system. You're not allowed to design your own systems and sell it to yourself in the company. So I had somebody, when I was pretty early on, design this for me, but it works perfectly fine. You'll see later, I live in a 9-window colonial here in Manchester, and we've got two different roof planes in parallel planes. So same pitch, although different planes, but still parallel. And one inverter, one's a 3.8 kW AC inverter. The other is a 7.6 kW AC inverter. We've got a combiner panel here. I've got a couple of batteries out in the garage. So this is what's called a Tesla gateway. That's basically a smart ATS, automatic transfer switch. So this is kind of the brains of the system. What you see here is the feed coming in from the meter. Our main breaker is actually now in this gateway. And then we're connected into our main service panel where most of our loads reside. And then we have a heavy loads panel. So there's a few circuits in here, some heat pumps that we have, which are great when the power is up and running 99.9% of the time. But if the grid were to go down, even those super efficient heat pumps have a pretty big power draw and would drain those batteries pretty quickly. So they are in here and they get dropped in the event of an outage. So that's kind of what electrical infrastructure might look like after a solar install. So here to there, from the solar panel to the waffle iron. So we connect the panels together in an array. It's very rare that someone might have, at least on their home or business, a single solar panel. So there's typically multiple solar panels wired together. And then we can interconnect those panels into the home or business's existing electrical system. Now, sometimes we need a panel upgrade or a service upgrade to get more power from the grid, from the utility grid. But typically, for most folks, we can directly connect to their existing infrastructure. That's typically done two different ways. For larger systems, you're doing what's called a supply side or line side tap, where we're actually tapping the feed from the meter above the main breaker. So it's downstream from the meter, upstream of the main breaker. And then the electrons that are coming off the roof when the sun is shining is going right onto that cable and feeding all the loads as they would normally be fed from the grid. On smaller systems, and this kind of depends on the bus bar rating, the size panel, a number of different variables, but it is possible sometimes to backfeed. We can install a breaker that is connected directly to the bus bar, and the inverter can backfeed through that breaker onto the bus bar. But we are kind of limited there by code and by kind of the specs of the system. From there, electrons produced by the solar flow normally as any electron would to where it's being, called by load demand. So in a practical sense, it kind of works like this. Anytime the sun is out, our panels are making power. Now, how much power they're making is dependent on a couple of variables, and we'll get into a couple of these variables in a little bit, but basically, what time of day is it? So where is the sun in the sky in relation to, how that solar panel is existing in the world? What are the conditions outside? Obviously, it's nighttime now. Our solar panels are not producing anything right now, but on a beautiful sunny day in the middle of the day, we're making power. The first responsibility of any power that we're making, any electrons that are coming off the roof, is to go to whatever the load demand is in that moment. So we're almost never, kind of in phase. We're almost always producing more than we're consuming or consuming more than we're producing. So in a scenario where we're producing more than we need, maybe we're at the beach in the middle of a summer day, the fridge is on, there's a couple of things drawing, but we have a relatively low demand, any excess above and beyond the loads that are already being satisfied by the solar is being pushed back out into the grid for our neighbors to use. Our meter is keeping track of that. Similarly, like right now, I have my lights on, I have my computer on, the sun is not shining. We are still tied to the grid. So we are still, importing electricity from the grid, and the meter is keeping track of that as well. So just to kind of set some, some groundwork here, this can be kind of confusing, but power versus energy. Power is the ability to do work. So here we're talking about electrical power. You could also have mechanical power, but that's basically the ability to do work. Power is measured instantaneously. And it's measured in units that we call watts. So you may have heard of kilowatts. That's 1,000 watts. A megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts. A gigawatt is 1,000,000 kilowatts. And then energy is power over time. So that's measured in units called kilowatt hours. So this is actually what you get billed for on your electric bill, not power, but energy. So you'll see kilowatt hours in a monthly billing period on your electric bill. And that's basically how much power you've used over a set period of time. So 1 kilowatt hour could be, drawn any number of different ways. So you could run something that consumes 1,000 watts in real time continuously for 1 hour, and you have consumed 1 kilowatt hour. Or you could consume 1 kilowatt hour of energy by running your home at 4,000 watts continuously for 15 minutes. So another way that, I like to kind of explain this to people is think of it like, you're at your kids or your nephew's or your niece's soccer game, and they have one of those big Gatorade jugs. And think about this in kind of a battery application. We're installing more and more batteries so that people can save up the power that they make or the energy that they make at night and discharge those batteries or over the day and discharge the batteries at night. So the volume of that battery is kilowatt hours, is energy. So that's how many gallons are in that Gatorade tank. How long it lasts you, though, how long it lasts you is directly related to how wide open you open that tap. So that Gatorade cooler can last a long, long time if we're taking little sips bit by bit. But if somebody comes off to the sideline at halftime and opens up the tap and fills up their cup and then walks away, and it's just gushing a ton of Gatorade, it's not going to last that long. So energy is what's stored in batteries, and batteries output power in the moment. So common types of solar installations, you've got residential rooftop installations. That's the market I work in. And then we've got commercial, industrial, and institutional rooftop installations. Those typically have some differences. They tend to be larger than private homes. A lot of times they're on flat roofs, industrial, warehouse roofs. So the way they're actually mounted to the building is different. And then, of course, ground mounted systems. And we've got a number of different ways that we can install those. There's linear racking. Sometimes you'll see single or dual axis trackers. And then utility scale, which is just really, really big solar arrays that are kind of act as power plants unto themselves. We've got some examples here. Here's kind of a linear racking system. Just speaking for our company personally, and this is not an infomercial, so not here to sell you on our company specifically, but we've made the choice to basically stick with linear racking. Generally, the efficiency of the panels is getting better and better all the time. And you don't have the mechanical complexity, especially of a dual axis tracker, where, a dual axis tracker, which I'll show you an example of that in a moment. There, here on your right, dual axis trackers, which track on the y-axis annually, over the course of the year, and then on the x-axis throughout the day, trying to maintain that perfect perpendicular angle to the sun, which is where we get the most power out of these solar panels. And then you can see a single axis tracker. So this is just tilting ever so slightly throughout the year, up and back. Then you've got ground mounted or utility scale solar. So these are typically, a lot of times they're what's called in front of the meter, meaning there are no loads at the actual location, whereas at a home or business, the solar is actually behind the meter. So the first responsibility of the electrons we're producing is to go to whatever the load demand is. And for a lot of municipalities, just as an example, their biggest load demand can be, if they have any type of pumping, any wastewater treatment centers or anything like that. Pumping water takes a ton of electricity. So the more generation you can have locally to feed that electrical demand without it ever interacting with the grid is where you can see some of the greatest financial benefits. Here's our dual axis trackers, and then you can see kind of an example of a commercial roof right there. I don't know where this is, maybe a warehouse of some kind, but you can see these panels are, you could walk through these rows, but they have a much lower pitch, maybe 5 to 10 degrees. But you can obviously fit a lot up there in a big roof. There's my house, home sweet home. So as I mentioned, 9 window colonial. So we've got two arrays there on parallel planes. We have 38 360 watt panels for a 13.68 kilowatt system. That's DC with 11.4 kW of AC inverter capacity. So here's kind of what I do on a daily basis. I evaluate people's homes for solar, and I think about it in kind of a couple different ways. Number one, I'm an educator. I help people better understand these technologies, how they work, how they integrate, into somebody's existing electrical infrastructure. And then I'm also doing energy modeling and financial modeling. So I'm really there to be a resource to answer questions and then to collect accurate data, which I can then apply to the modeling so people can, take a really sober look at their opportunity and evaluate it on their own terms. For some folks, they're very environmentally minded. Other folks are almost exclusively, economically minded. But the nice thing about that is it's really two sides of the exact same coin. You cannot have a very sunny, optimally sited solar project and have kind of bad economics, right? You can't get one without the other. So I show up, I talk to people about what their goals are, and then I look to collect a number of data points and understanding these variables, which are unique to each different home. We can predict with pretty good accuracy what a solar array would be likely to produce in a given year. The consumption side of things, that's a little trickier. We try and use, at least a year of historical electrical consumption data, but we are electrifying society, beneficial electrification. If you've heard of the electrify everything movement, we anticipate load growth across all different kinds of sectors and for all different kinds of reasons: home heating, transportation, all that stuff. So what are those important variables? Latitude, where are we on the planet? Azimuth, what direction on the compass are these solar panels going to be facing? And then roof pitch, or if we're looking at a ground mount, what is the optimal pitch for solar installation based on your latitude? And then local shading, right? Do you have trees or maybe a neighbor's house that may be casting shade onto a potential roof plane or location for a ground mount? So what is latitude? This is pretty basic. It's a coordinate basically showing in relation to the North and South Pole on a spherical planet, where you are, right? So you can see in the diagram, the equator is at 0 degrees. The Tropic of Cancer is at 23, 26 north. And you can see right here, I just went and we're at about 44, 27 north at the observatory up on the summit of Mount Washington. So latitude helps us understand how much sunshine falls in a certain place on an annual basis. Now, this doesn't factor in local weather patterns, and certainly you can, it's a perfect example, Mount Washington, right? There's all kinds of places around, North America that are the exact same latitude as the summit of Mount Washington, but have vastly, vastly different weather patterns, microclimates, things like that. So we want to be conscious of that, but at least that tells us how much sunshine is actually falling at that latitude. Whether or not it gets through or not, that's a different story. The closer to the poles we get, the shorter the days get in the winter. Here we're just a couple of weeks from the shortest day of the year. So based on wherever that solar installation is going to be on Earth, we're factoring in latitude. Here you can kind of see an example of latitude isn't the only factor, but this is a color-coded map of the power potential for PV installations worldwide. So you can see a number of different things are taken into consideration. You can see in the northern hemisphere here, we've got a lot of green, but you can see even along, look at 45 degrees north, halfway between the equator and the North Pole, and there's quite a lot of variance right there. Hokkaido, I don't know if we have any skiers here. That is somewhat of a mecca for powder skiers. Hokkaido is one of the snowiest places on Earth. And yet here we can see at the exact same latitude in Inner Mongolia, we've got a much, much greater solar resource potential there. Here you can see in the United States. So, you wouldn't think it, but again, latitude is just one factor. We have effectively the same potential in southeastern New Hampshire, coastal Maine, Massachusetts, Storrs, Connecticut, my hometown, as Houston, Texas. So you might not think, and in fact, we often hear people say, oh, solar doesn't make any sense in New England. We don't get enough sun. Well, that's not exactly true. It's about more than your latitude. And so another thing we factor in is azimuth. What direction is this roof facing? That's the angular measurement in a spherical coordinate system, which represents the horizontal angle from a cardinal direction, right? So here in New England, I want to say Boston is about 194 degrees solar south, and Portland, Maine is about 195. So that gets into kind of magnetic declination and kind of true versus magnetic and all of that stuff. But suffice it to say, if you're facing south, you're in a really good place. But even east and west facing roof planes, if they're not too terribly shaded, can still be very, very, very productive. In the northern hemisphere, solar systems are more productive the closer they're facing to south. Obviously, this is just the opposite for our friends in the global south. The north side of your roof would be the most optimal down there. Roof pitch, or just pitch of a ground mount. And this gives us an understanding of, when these arrays are going to be at peak power, throughout the year. A solar panel is most productive when the sun is hitting it at a 90-degree angle. That's a very, very small percentage of the time, right? So on the y-axis, it may only be a couple days a year, and then depending on the azimuth of your roof, you may never get to that 90% or that 90-degree angle on the x-axis at certain points of the year. It's possible. Here in the Northeast and in other snowy locations, we also factor in or think about the pitch when doing our modeling based on snow loads, right? Not only whether a roof will pass a structural analysis, which is required here in New Hampshire, but also we're thinking about how long would snow potentially stay on the roof. Here you can see my house again. This is the first winter we had our solar array. This was actually just about this time, 2020. It was a big storm between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and that you can see we had some wind loading on the south side of our roof, and this entire slab slid as one piece. So depending on the pitch of your roof, that's going to determine, consistency of the snow and some other variables. That's going to determine how long snow remains on those solar panels, and we're going to factor that into a production estimate. If you have a very, very shallow pitched roof in the wintertime, you can expect that snow to stay there for a long time. Again, to any of my skiers out there, if any of you are like me, you got your avalanche certification up on Mount Washington, Tuckerman Ravine, and you can see here, and this is not, there are other variables, but basically, if you have a really steep pitch roof, then that snow is going to slough very, very often, right? If you have a very low pitched roof, it may not slough at all. You may have to rely on it, melting. Um, and just in our own modeling, we factor in historical weather data as well. How are we doing on time? 36. Wrap this up. So we use a device called the Sun Eye. So you can see down here, this is for my roof, input a little bit of data. We have a 32-degree roof. My roof is facing about 175 degrees on the compass. And what you're seeing here on the x-axis is 6 a.m., 8 a.m., 10 a.m., noon, and so on. The camera, it's a fisheye lens, but pointing it south. And then on the y-axis, you can see months of the year. So based on wherever these shading obstructions fall within the frame of the photo in this path, representing the sun's path throughout the year, we can get values, based on these shots from around the roof, and use that as a basis for our production estimate. Here you can see some trees on the east side of my yard that, and this time of year, in around 9:30 to 11, we're getting some shade from this enormous white pine in my neighbor's yard. So this is how we quantify the amount of sunshine that would fall on a roof. We also have increasing LiDAR coverage. So LiDAR is like radar, but with light. So planes, or I guess you could do it from a helicopter, fly overhead and shoot beams of light down, and they reflect back up. And based on the time it takes, to come down and back up, we can do some really impressive mapping of, I know ecologists are using this for mapping forest canopy, and snow scientists are using it to actually penetrate snow to get snow depth, things like that. But we can use it in the solar world to quantify how much of an impact, a tree or a neighboring building might have. So you can see, here's my house, made a little 3D model, and you can see the color-coded nature of the roof shows you where the shadiest parts are. So here you can see these panels right there are the least productive on our entire roof, because starting in, mid to early afternoon, depending on the time of year, these panels get encroached upon by shade from the upper roof first. And this is the last slide. I thought you guys might be interested in actually seeing an installation. So this is a little time lapse of my roof. Some of my co-owners come and put the feet onto the roof, lay out some rail. You can see there's vertical rail on the very top row, because we have some panels in landscape orientation on the upper roof. You can see everyone has a harness and an anchor. Safety first, never last. Have a future, not a past. And there they go, one by one. Panels get wired up, placed, attached to the rail. And what you don't see is the electricians doing the interconnection down in the basement. And that's really it. So that's kind of a snapshot of how we evaluate sites for solar. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and Brian, if you want to hit me with some questions.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love to. Thank you so much, Chris. That was
How'd I do?
fascinating. Um, awesome information. Really appreciate that. And there are some great questions, some really thoughtful questions already been submitted. And for those of you who'd like to get a chance to get your question answered by Chris, feel free. If you're on Zoom, make sure you use the Q&A button, and we'll just try and get to as many questions as we can. We got a little bit of time here, so as long as you're happy, Chris, we got some interested parties here, including, we'll just start right out the gate. Doug asked, hey, do solar panels produce electricity when it's cloudy?
Well, yeah, yes. Depends on how cloudy. Certainly you're not going to make as much power, as a bluebird day. But yes, solar panels will. There's still some light getting through those clouds. so you will still see some power being produced, but again, it is kind of dependent on how thick is the cloud cover and what time of day, all those variables that we talked about earlier. But yeah, we can still produce on cloudy days.
Nice. Um, Apologies if I pronounce your name incorrectly, but Alita asked a question around brands of solar panels. What brands do you guys typically work with? What are some other brands that Alita's asking specifically that you might recommend, and maybe why?
So I hesitate here. Like I said, I don't want this to be an infomercial for revision. I truly love this company. It's an incredible. We're an ESOP, 100% employee owned. We're a B Corp. We're a mission driven company. We've got an incredibly high B Corp score. If you don't know what a B Corp is, it's kind of distill it down to kind of the people, planet, profit, kind of the triple bottom line. So we make every decision based on what's good for our employee owners, our communities that we work in, the world. We're not a nonprofit. We do try to make money. No money, no mission. Sometimes you hear people say. What I would say is there's a lot of really good solar panels now. You got to dig pretty deep in the crate to find junk. I encourage people to really just vet the installers that you're working with. I saw last month Time Magazine had a really interesting article about it was something about solar sales bros and how shady contractors really threaten the industry. So I would say don't get too deep into the weeds on the actual components because they're all pretty darn good at this point. I'd spend more of my time vetting who you're actually going to partner with for your installation. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's great. Appreciate your transparency on that piece as well. This is a good question from David. I'm not sure if you covered it as one of the many variables that you look at in the potential project, especially the residential side of things. David wants to know, how does roof condition, especially age, factor into an installation? How does a panel array affect an underlying roofing system?
Yeah, it kind of depends on what the roof system is. So most typically what we see in this part of the country, and this does vary a little bit, depending on can be hyper local. If you drive, my parents live in the Adirondacks, you drive up and over the Green Mountains, you'll see a lot more metal roofs. Same thing up in the Whites, Mount Washington Valley. Down here in Manchester, predominantly, in southern New Hampshire, Massachusetts, southern New England, asphalt shingle roofs. So it really kind of depends. We can basically install on all of it. On an asphalt shingle roof, one of the things we're going to do is well, first of all, here in New Hampshire, we need a structural analysis. So we're going to want to get a look at the structural members, size, spacing of rafters. And then basically we drill a pilot hole once we know where those rafters are that dies in the rafter. So it's not going to open space. It actually, the hole dies in the rafter. We inject a silicone sealant or kind of caulk material, lag bolt, rubber gasket, attaches a foot, and then the rail goes across. On standing seam roofs, I don't know the last time you guys got a roof priced out. They're not cheap. They will outlive you though. So, but those ones we just get identify what is the spacing between the seams, what is the profile, and the size of this seam, and we can have these little, like almost like a vise that we just take a torque wrench and pinch all over the seams. As far as age is concerned, it really depends. The best time to put a solar array on is when your roof is brand spanking new, but nobody likes writing that check unless you absolutely have to. So it's tricky. I'm not a roofing expert. I go up on them all the time, but and I'm happy to give people, kind of my general thoughts, but typically I say, have a roofer come out and evaluate it. Because really what you don't want is to invest this money in a solar array on your roof and then have to get your roof replaced in 5 years and pay your contractor to come back, disassemble it, set it on the ground, let your roofer come in, do their thing, and then put it all back together again. So
Yeah, I mean, so I guess on the flip side of that, Chris, I mean, because a couple people have asked in the questions here as well. I mean, the other variable being, well, how old's the roof? Well, how long are these solar panels going to last? What is, I mean, generally the range you're seeing or the expectation you're seeing with some of these systems?
yeah, for roof mounted panels, their industry standard is pretty much a 25-year warranty these days.
Yeah,
But they're really designed to produce electricity for 35, 40 years. Put it this way, in most projects, in my experience, that move forward, the system will pay for itself multiple times over in its usable life.
yeah,
Um, Obviously, the more advantageous the variables we discussed, the more productive the solar array will be. Typically, the quicker the return on the investment. Um, but that also depends on what is our electric consumption like. Sometimes I pull up in a neighborhood of McMansions and people are using 25,000 kilowatt hours a year, and they say, what do you mean I can't, get 100% offset?" So it's really case by case,
yeah.
is what I would say.
That's incredible. Yeah, a lot of variables, including another one that Martha's curious about that I'm curious too, because on the Mount Washington side of things, there's always this question of Martha asks, can you safely install solar panels on a residential roof in a high wind area? Martha is saying that they're building a home on the coast of Rhode Island. And they want to include solar energy to power the house. What's that wind maximum look like, or what do you need to do maybe
I
to
don't know.
adjust to that?
I'd have to defer to our engineering team on the top of the Northeast up over your shoulder there, Brian. I
Yeah,
don't know if we have anything that's rated for that. But just about everyone else, we're a Maine-based company. We're headquartered in South Portland. We've got tons of installations in coastal Maine, right on um, some pretty rugged coastlines. Part of the engineering review that we do is not only structural, but wind and snow loading. So all those calculations are being done. So if there was ever a problem, sometimes we put in special engineering, if we really need to bolster something. But, unless you live at the top of the Cog Railway, I think we could probably help you out.
well, hey, we'll talk after this about helping you break
I don't
some
know. I think
cables
wind
and
power might be better for
oh
for
yeah,
you guys out there.
that has its own challenges too. There is such thing as too much of a good thing. Um, a couple folks have asked, I mean, around some of the snow loading question as well. And apologies, I'm just gonna mash together a few different questions here from folks. I mean, have you seen? Well, I know you mentioned, when snow loading is happening, perhaps especially on a roof pitch that maybe is pretty shallow or not going to slough off that snow really quickly. Have you seen or know of safe and effective ways for clearing that snow, or people getting creative and using, I don't know, they're de-icing their de-icing hoses on their roof or whatever they're doing? Anything like that?
I've never heard of anyone pre-treating their solar panels to what is the is it one of the Christmas Vacations where they put like Pam on the bottom of the saucer or something?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I don't know about any of that, but so here's what we would say. We encourage people not to clear their solar panels if they can help it. One of the nice things about ground mounts for folks who, maybe have the space is that the front edge of kind of that linear racking that I was showing you is 2.5, 3 feet off the ground. So it's very easy and safe to go out and clear the snow off those panels. Listen, it's your house, it's your panels, it's your money. You can do whatever you want. We're not in the business of telling people what to do, but we want people to really be safe. And for most folks, that snow is going to either slough or melt or a combination of the two on its own, and it's not worth a couple of extra kilowatt hours. It's not worth potentially falling off a ladder, in my opinion. As someone who goes on ladders for a living, my number one goal every single day is to walk back through my own front door under my own power. That is goal number one. So do what you want, but full transparency on our lower roof, our garage roof, that first floor roof. I have a very long extendable pole with a foam squeegee, and I have gone out there and cleared, but I make sure that I'm far enough away that the snow would never slough on top of me. So that's what I would say. Do as I say, not as I do, maybe.
All right. Well, we won't tell other employee owners there what you do in your free time. Chris, I mean, this is the $1 million question, obviously, for a lot of people who may be curious about solar at their home and all those sorts of things. Sandy's asking, specifically, to like your home example, if you're willing to share, what did costs look like for you then? I know quite a bit has changed even in the last few years since you've installed. And I don't know, maybe it's just helpful to give maybe a range on what, say, like the typical I don't know, array might look like, because I'm sure it must vary quite a bit home to home, especially based on demand.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's tricky. First of all, mine is not a good example because I basically get this, not only materials, but also installation, not quite at cost, but pretty darn close. So we have one of the perks of working for an employee-owned solar company, right?
Great. Yeah.
Really depends on how big the system is. The larger the system, the lower the cost per watt you're going to see, because we have some fixed costs that can be spread out over a larger system size. One thing I should say is that another big part of my job is to talk to people about the kind of policy environment we find ourselves in, the regulatory environment we find ourselves in. We have all kinds of incentives now. Federal tax credits have been around, but have varied throughout the years. So, my system was installed in 2020, a couple months into the pandemic. Solar had been on a really long cost decline. And then because of the supply chain issues that kind of hit all around the globe in all kinds of different industries, solar costs bumped up slightly. We've seen them start to recover again as kind of the kinks in supply chains have evened out. And then the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed, last late summer, fall, whenever it was signed, we're really establishing or trying to establish a solar and battery supply chain here in the United States. I would say the trickiest part for us right now, and this is residential, commercial, grid scale, the great thing about solar and wind and things like that is that the fuel is free, but the capital expenditure is up front instead of over time. So you put that money up front. And what's really been challenging for us as an industry is the high cost of capital, of just borrowing. So, you folks all see it. You want to buy a car and get a loan or buy a home, forget the actual price of the thing. The borrowing environment, it has been challenging. So that's really more the tricky part. Hopefully that'll start to ease a bit, but that's really where it's been a little more challenging. But as far as, I really hesitate to even guess on somebody's, individual situation without knowing more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and I guess there's a question here from Mark as well. Just, I'm sure it's changed over time, and advantages versus disadvantages of either saying buying outright a system, or, leasing or, needing financing to support a project like this. I'm sure it's tricky and different for everybody, right?
Yeah. So we don't do leasing.
Okay.
My take on kind of lease versus buy, obviously if you've got the cash that you can take out of savings or some type of account and you don't have to pay any interest, great. There's no better way to do it. The the leasing model is really not for us as a business, but it's got its place, right? And there can be some shady stuff here, but a lot of times leases will kind of look like, you lease the equipment, the company comes in and installs the solar panels on your roof, and you basically sign a contract where the price of whatever power that they produce from your roof is indexed uh with your utilities price. So you're going to sign a contract and you're always going to be 10 or 15% lower than what the utility is charging. However, there's just far, far less savings over time. So the nice thing is you may not have to spend a lot of money up front. You may not have to apply for financing. You may not have to qualify for financing or, have your credit checked or anything like that. So it does have a place, no doubt. And I would still encourage people who, if they think about leasing, you still want to work with somebody that's reputable. Believe me, just anecdotally, the service department of our company is the fastest growing part of our business. We've been around for 20 years now. We got a lot of systems out in the world. And we get we're inundated with calls all the time of, people who have had a system installed and their contractor has up and vanished, or the company has gone bankrupt. So regardless of what you do, I can't stress hard, enough, vet your contractor thoroughly. So
Yeah, could only imagine, especially if you are making a significant investment. Maybe time for just thank you, Chris, for answering so many questions. This might be close to a record for the amount of questions we've gotten. Actually,
Brian, I'm ready to go. Huskies don't play till 9. We're playing
all
at the
right, all
Garden
right,
against
okay, okay.
UNC tonight.
No.
So I tip off at 9. So I'm going to be up late tonight. So I can take as many as you
All
want.
right. Okay. Well, great. I love it. A couple questions, I think, around the idea. Maybe I don't know if maybe you can talk a little bit. This may not be your wheelhouse around. Apologies, I forgot who asked about this question, but around net metering, and I think similarly, Kenneth here is asking a question around, if when you are producing more energy than you need, do all grids or power companies allow you to feed back into the grid and reverse the meter? I mean, we're kind of, I guess, talking about similar things. Net metering, could you maybe explain that one just a little bit? I know it gets a little technical and policy driven.
Yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, net metering is kind of the financial framework within which we are compensated for overproduction. So again, anytime the sun is shining, our panels are making power. The first responsibility of those electrons in that moment is to go to whatever your load demand is. If you're making more than you need at any given moment, you're pushing power out into the grid. How you're compensated is determined on a state by state and even utility to utility basis. So it's different from state to state. And even here within the state, we've got our 3 major utilities and the New Hampshire Electrical Co-op, NHEC. And then we have a couple of, I think Wolfboro has a municipal utility. There may be a couple other municipal utilities in town or in the state. Actually, the Public Utilities Commission, I think they just closed up a docket, a couple of days ago. Kind of they're going to be making a decision on the future of net metering here in New Hampshire. But all the 3 major utilities all came out in support of net metering as it is currently constituted here in New Hampshire. But I know, at the poll beginning today, we have people from all over New England, and some folks from even outside of New England. So, I only work in the state of New Hampshire. So I can speak, and even in New Hampshire, I'm primarily doing Eversource territory. So basically the way it works is you're compensated for power that you send out, and you're charged for power that you bring in overnight and, in times when you're not producing. The fine details of what that looks like is really dependent on where you live.
Yeah. Yeah. So just another piece of the puzzle for sure. But I guess an important one if, in a policy perspective, should something change radically. But Certainly see that coming up in the news from time to time, and like you said, depends on where you live. I'm
Mhm.
wondering, Robert asked a nice question here. I don't know if you can speak a little bit more just about, battery storage and what that kind of looks like. I know you showed your home example, and maybe just sort of generally, what that's all about, maybe, and how you've used it and things like that.
Yeah, so batteries, again, we're kind of getting to kind of my batteries right now are still kind of expensive. And at least in New Hampshire, for most folks, they're making more and more sense day by day, but we're still not quite at a point where, you know, maybe I don't have my crystal ball, but 5 years, 10 years, I'll probably never sell a solar project without pairing it with batteries because the technologies are really like peanut butter and jelly.
Mm.
You know, you produce power during the day, you store it in a battery, and you can discharge it at night, overnight, right? Or when the grid goes down. Really, that's the primary function that a battery serves right now in New Hampshire, at least, is if you don't have a generator, then if the power goes out, you have a battery. And I should say, if you don't have a battery and you have solar panels and your neighbor backs out of his driveway and hits the power pole and you lose power, you know your solar is not going to produce when the grid is down, even if it's sunny. And that's by code. That's to protect. We can't have solar panels backfeeding the grid when there's a grid disruption, and it's a safety thing.
Yeah.
But batteries can do all kind. Friends of ours who might be tuning in from Vermont, they have a demand response program. So what that looks like is, and I don't know the exact specifics, but demand response generally is, August 15th, it's 95 degrees. Every air conditioner in the state of Vermont is plugged in and cranking away. If you were to look at the demand curve, for the grid for Vermont as a whole, it's going like a rocket ship. So what that forces the grid operator to do traditionally is go out and buy really expensive power on the spot market above and beyond those base load contracts that they've kind of signed. And what Vermont has done is incentivize battery installs, and people participate in demand response programs. So they do what's called peak shaving. So the grid operator can now remotely discharge all of those batteries, all that stored up energy out into the grid to shave the peak off of that demand curve. And then as soon as the demand starts to subside, those batteries recharge so that they're ready to serve their primary purpose, if the grid goes down.
Yeah.
In Massachusetts, you've got, there's all kinds of different kind of regulatory structures, smart metering, load shifting, things like that. Batteries have an enormous role to play in the future. But again, that's another thing where it's kind of here in New Hampshire, we don't have any battery incentives. I believe Massachusetts has a state battery incentive. So, the technology's gonna get cheaper. It's gonna get better. You're gonna get better energy density. We're seeing different chemistries for different applications. In 20 years, we're not gonna have the same battery chemistries for batteries that sit in your basement and never move as batteries that go in your car. There's a lot of really promising iron chemistries. Iron is, I think, the most plentiful element in the Earth's crust, but it's super heavy. So it's abundant, but it's not exactly what you'd want underneath your butt when you're driving down the road. But if it's just going to be in a battery that sits in your basement or your garage and never moves, then great. So keep an eye on it. We are not far away from batteries just being a no-brainer pairing with solar.
Oh, fascinating. And of course, you mentioned those other aspects that you're working in, and heat pumps and heat pump hot water heaters and those other technologies that clearly seem to be on a
And
similar
certainly
trajectory.
batteries other places in the world, the attachment rate, which is kind of industry jargon for like solar sold with batteries
Yeah.
simultaneously, really, really high in places where the electric grid may be very unreliable. Just anecdotally, the batteries that I've sold are usually to people who are, in really rural communities who, if they're not literally the last pole on a dirt road, they're pretty darn close. And they're, when they lose power, it's usually for a long time, and they're, and it's pretty often. So the value proposition for them is a lot different. Brian, the one other thing I did want to, I didn't even realize I could see these questions, but there were a couple of questions about recycling. The US really needs recycling policy for solar. We can recoup a lot of the materials, a
Yeah.
huge percent of the materials in solar panels. But right now, we don't really have good systems for that. The EU has a really robust kind of cradle to grave solar recycling protocol, and so we can do it. Same thing with batteries, like the ability to actually recycle batteries, at the end of life and refine those materials and put them into new batteries. So that there's a lot of potential there, but we definitely need some guidance and kind of public-private partnership to kind of push the needle on that. I would say if you're getting a solar array today, by the time it's at the end of its usable life, we'll almost certainly have a good, robust recycling kind of infrastructure set up. So.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, that was a question that came up from a couple different individuals, and certainly, especially if you're of that eco mindset, that's another piece that I'm sure folks are considering. As you mentioned, one of the many reasons why folks might be interested in solar PV. But Chris, I'm sorry to leave it here. I know for folks who've joined, this has been fantastic. Really appreciate you spending some time with us tonight, sharing about your work. If you don't mind, maybe for folks who have still more questions that pop up after the program, you can always reach me at education@mountwashington.org and can pass along some questions to Chris here. Chris, what's the best way for folks to get in contact either with you or with Revision? Is there a preferred way?
Well, I'm 2 weeks into 12 weeks of paternity leave. I got a 3-month-old in the next room, so you can't get a hold of me for another couple of months. But revisionenergy.com if you want to check us out. We got an incredible team, and one of the many great reasons that I love being an employee owner is that we have 12 weeks of paid paternity leave. So I get a chance to be a dad who's focused basically only on my son and not answering emails. And but my colleagues will be happy to answer any other questions that you folks have. So
Awesome. Well, Chris, I really appreciate, especially doing this on your leave. That really means a lot to us, and
happy
congratulations
to.
to you and your family. That's exciting stuff. Well, hey, everyone else who joined this evening, thanks so much for joining another Science in the Mountains program. If you enjoyed tonight's free program, we strongly encourage you to support our 2023 year-end campaign with a donation over at mountwashington.org. In the coming weeks, we're going to be sharing observatory highlights demonstrating the impact of your support as we plan an exciting future here at the observatory in areas such as scientific research and technology, education and outreach, and also recreation and safety. Your support makes our work possible, so thank you so much. If you have thoughts for tonight's speaker, thoughts for some future programs, there'll be a Google Form survey that follows this event. Thank you in advance for any of your thoughts there. And then finally, don't forget to join us for an upcoming Science in the Mountains program. Tuesday, January 16th, we'll have McGill University Associate Professor Renee Seiber and the observatory's Executive Director Drew Bush will present on their ongoing research looking at how effectively social media is being used to keep people safe during extreme weather events. And then also on February 20th, Fairfield University Associate Professor Robert Nazarian will share his research into projecting future trends in extreme precipitation across the northeastern United States. So don't forget to sign up for those programs over at mountwashington.org. You can see any of the programs you might have missed previously. Thanks so much for joining everyone tonight. And thank you again, Chris. Really appreciate it. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you having me, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care.
Huskies.